Hello, everybody, and welcome to our Worth Live panel on investing internationally in sustainable businesses. This session is in partnership with Bermuda Development Agency, and I am including a link in the chat for anyone interested in learning more about them. Bermuda is striving to become a leader on the world stage in the sphere of climate risk solutions, and conversations like these are something that they're going to be continuing at their second annual Bermuda Climate Summit, something I'm sure you'll hear a little bit more about, but I'm also including a link to that. You're all invited. I hope you can make it to Bermuda. And without much further ado, I'm going to introduce our wonderful moderator for today, Tom Poulton. In 2019, Tom founded a consulting strategy organization to advise companies, financial institutions, and nonprofit organizations to better manage ESG risks and opportunities. Clients include a European pharmaceutical company, TED's climate initiative, and a nonprofit focused on eco-anxiety. Previously, Tom led Pfizer's environmental, sustainability, and product stewardship programs. He is an adjunct professor teaching enterprise sustainability to Clarkson University graduate students, and he co-chairs the Harvard School of Public Health Climate Advocacy Alumni Association. He was also trained as climate reality project leader in 2020, and now chairs the New York State Education Coalition for the organization established by Vice President Al Gore. And on the side, he helps us moderate conversations. Thank you so much, Tom. I'll let you take it away.
Thanks very much. I appreciate the introduction there, and welcome everybody who's joining us. Let's have our speakers come on camera and join us as well. I'm incredibly pleased to have this remarkable panel here together today. I think you're going to hear a broad set of experiences, a broad set of perspectives, and really help to enlighten you on ESG issues. So with this, I'm going to ask each of our attendees to introduce themselves, and because we have three panelists, I've given them assignments to take one of the ESG topics as they do their introduction, and this will help the attendees understand the issues associated with ESG, their perspectives, and learn more about their backgrounds. So Fani, why don't you go first, tell us about yourself, and talk about the E and how you apply it.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much. I'm Fani Bortling. I'm the founder and CEO of Jacaranda Capital. Jacaranda is a project, an economic project, working with carbon markets and mostly with sustainable regenerative agriculture and sustainable agriculture in a ways of decarbonizing supply chains with the purpose of lowering emissions, carbon emissions for multinationals, as well as creating carbon to offset the emissions that cannot be eliminated at this point. My background is in finance and accounting, and I did most of my career developing financial products to transition land to organic as well as regenerative agriculture. So I've worked with farmers most of my career. I'm taking the E, environmental. That is my main focus. It is important for this community because as ESG grows, investors must understand the impact in the environment of the companies in which they invest in. It's important to manage the transition exposure because there is going to be transition for the next 40, 50 years. It's important to capture the climate-related opportunities, not always risks. There are huge opportunities when it comes to environmental and climate change, and improve impact of their investments.
Fantastic.
So, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
No, that's great. And by the way, even though I'm having each of the speakers pick one of these, they're not limited to that. All of these folks work across the three areas of environmental, social, and governance. But Greg, why don't you introduce yourself and talk about the social aspect and help our audience understand that a little bit better.
Thank you, Tom. I found a Bermuda cup from my wife. She did a sport event there when she was in high school a long time ago. It was on my desk, which is kind of funny. Pleasure to be here, and really appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit more about what we're doing here at CoPeace and kind of the impact investing ESG world that we're in right now. CoPeace is a impact investing holding company. We are trying to help impactful companies grow. And we do that through investing and through services. So very honestly, was fortunate to have the privilege of friends and family that had seen us succeed in some other things and gave us a little cash to get started. So we're out there trying to do the work. From the ESG perspective, S has been the most challenging for us, very honestly, so far. We try to use all ESG data points as we make our investment decisions and our partnership decisions and everything we do. Honestly, we are a certified B Corp, so we try to blend that relatively significantly challenging assessment into everything we do. So that on the S side, I like to point to our first investment because it was brought to us through some of our connections in sport that we were a little shy about, but we agree with Nelson Mandela that sport has the power to change the world, and that kind of has been a driver for us on the social side as we look at things. But our first investment at CoPeace is in a Black woman-run business out of New York that's bringing cloud and smart city infrastructure to communities that don't have access to the grid. And we love the investment because we're not shy about seeking a strong return. She's guaranteed us that that's coming our way, and she's brilliant. But it hits the S side because it's providing services and some internet access to many communities that haven't had that opportunity. So that's important to us. I think through the sport lens, we've been able to invest a couple other things of late from the CoPeace side. Our most recent investment is in a company called Burst Media that has created several DEI long form and short form vignettes. And our most recent one is going to be debuting here pretty soon, and it's about Buck O'Neill and Herb Carnegie and some athletes that never had the opportunity to play at the highest level. So for us, it's a cool investment because we're getting a decent return and we get some upside, and that hits the S. We also have an app that is helping serve the mental health needs of the LGBTQIA+ community that is doing the work on the S side. So we're working on figuring out the S. The E was easier for us to measure at first, but now we're making progress.
Fantastic, and I think you had at the B Corp a great S example, but you went on to highlight so many other great examples of how you apply social to an investment strategy. So, Steve, let's go to you and we'll let you talk about governance, but also talk about yourself and the many hats that you wear.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, fellow panelists, and thank you, Worth, for organizing this important and incredibly timely conversation. So I am wearing a few hats today. I'm very grateful to have recently completed my term as chair of the BDA, the Bermuda Business Development Agency, which is putting this on in partnership with Worth. And indeed, we are hosting our second annual Climate Summit at the end of June. And I hope to see many of you on the call there in person. June is a great time to be in Bermuda, and it's always an important time to talk about innovation and resilience in respect of climate. I continue on as the chair of the Bermuda Institute of Ocean Sciences, one of the world's premier, it's exactly what it sounds like, institutes to study ocean sciences. There's no better place in the world to study the world's oceans than out in the world ocean, which is where Bermuda is located. But I'm also here as someone who spent 2 decades in reinsurance and insurance. Reinsurance, for those who don't know, it's the most interesting business that perhaps you've never heard of. It's insurance for insurance companies. Reinsurance provides diversification and affordability for complex coverages that tend to concentrate with large aggregators of risk like insurance companies. And perhaps the most important of those risks today are climate-driven risks like hurricanes, floods, and wildfires. And we'll talk about that more, of course, as the hour goes on. But like my company, most of the companies who've chosen to raise capital from, and organize in Bermuda are public companies, and governance matters a lot to us. I joined my prior shop as the chief legal officer. I ran our board engagement and stakeholder engagement. And whether it's promoting transparency in the flow of information to investors who demand it, to supporting the stewardship of boards of directors who are required to think strategically and respect of the long and medium term, governance is a key driver of corporate sustainability and corporate outperformance, and an extremely important topic for us to talk about today.
Fantastic. And I think folks get a good perspective on how all of these issues come together to strengthen a company's performance. So I do want to turn towards what aspects of ESG do you consider the most important? Craig, I know you gave me quite a bit there for many sectors. So I'm going to go to the other speakers first. So Bonnie, why don't you tell us, in terms of ESG, what you consider being the most important as you look with at companies based upon your experience and background and the types of clients that you work with?
Yes, thank you. ESG is a tool to address and account for management performance. So basically, as a tool, it's only as good as the information that we put in, that's the information that we'll get out to make investment decisions. In terms of social, the S and ESG is probably the most difficult to capture. Even when it comes to the E, there are many tools available to financial investors to help you assess the health or the strength of the company, how is it positioned in terms of ESG. Yet, there is a lot of still speculation, and there is huge disparity in a gap between whether you're looking at a company in the United States or in Europe or in any other country in the world. So there is no standardized system to address ESG. That's the first challenge. The second challenge, or the second thing to look at, some of the financial tools that are available to assess ESG in terms of investment is the price of carbon. So that's one tool that has been the most and the best developed in terms of measuring ESG. So as the price of carbon is actually dealing with the E directly, there is huge impact and ramifications on the social aspect and the communities where environmental and sustainability is in transition. And the price of carbon needs a regulation framework for markets, liquidity, and ease of access is another big one. So those are things to look at as you are evaluating your investments. And including carbon prices within analysis and different scenarios, that is going to be crucial if it's not being done yet. Because as carbon prices are ranging between $50 and $100 a ton, you need to think that European companies or any company with European subsidiaries, if they emit more over $1 million tons of carbon a year, they will need to compensate. What market are they tapping into? What kind of carbon? Not all carbon is created equal. How much are they paying? The cost of compensating $1 million in a million tons of carbon is enormous, and it's going to have huge impact on the return on investments. Another thing that I will touch on is the climate risk analysis, which is also going to have huge impact in the companies that we invest in. So that's why ESG is so crucial. There has been a lot of conversations, but it is crucial to push as an investor for disclosure and for understanding scenarios and for knowing that the companies are responsible. It's showing responsibility and corporate responsibility as well.
Before I move on to Steve to get his perspectives on his work with the environmental issues, I just want to build in, we think of the cost of carbon as being related to fossil fuels. But tell us how the agricultural sector feeds into the price of carbon and the opportunities there, and how they focus in on climate change and their impacts.
Absolutely. So companies in order to lower their emissions, they're going to have to address the three stages or the three types of carbon emissions. Jacaranda works with the type 1, which is agriculture. Agriculture is it's a massive, massive offender these days, not only because of the impact that it has in climate change, but also the impact in human health. You need to think that today, even here around the corner in the Midwest, where we are growing a lot of organic crops, we're still doing monoculture. We're still approaching agriculture with an extractive mind. So this just erodes the land, and it's going to affect the nutritional values of the foods that we eat, let alone agriculture. For larger organizations or multinationals, or anyone for that matter, but I'm addressing the larger organizations who have pledged net zero by 2030, 2040, 2050, one of the places where they need to start is agriculture and their supply chains. And this is the first step on their supply chain. So changing the way we grow food with regenerative agriculture. This is not going only to lower the company's emissions, but is also the only place in the entire supply chain where you are creating carbon credits for the emissions that you cannot compensate. So a lot of the carbon credits these days that are being used for compensation are coming from the Amazons, and there are many, many projects around the world that are creating carbon credits. And the way it's created, it's through the land and the plants and the trees, and those are the ones creating the carbon credits that are being used for lowering emissions.
Thank you. That's a point that I really wanted to get out there for our audience. I do encourage folks to put in questions. I do see we have one. I assure you we will get to that one as we dig into the discussion. But Steve, I know we'll certainly give you a chance to talk about the opportunity that comes through ESG. But your career, much of it in reassurance is built around managing risk. I'm just curious of your perspectives and how folks can get ahead of the risk models by leveraging your efforts.
Yeah, thank you for that, Tom. And since you asked what's the most important of these, I might take a quick moment and argue that it's possible to argue that governance is the most important, that without accountability, transparency, and the right feedback mechanisms, we can't make progress through market-based mechanisms in any robust and verifiable means. But, Tom, as you know, because we've chatted about it, in my opinion, the most significant set of risks that we face as businesses, as investors, and indeed as a public community are climate-driven risks. But we have proven means of succeeding to manage and mitigate and become more resilient to risks. And the insurance and reinsurance example for climate-driven hazards is a good example. Whether it's hurricanes, floods, tornadoes, hail, or wildfires, we've been exposed to risks at an accelerating pace. And in particular, in respect of hurricanes, we've learned how to manage and mitigate those risks with better financial products, with better home building, and importantly, with broader and effective community resilience. We are really good at building storm resilient homes. Bermuda was good at it in the 1700s. In some respects, we've returned to the past, but I lived for years in a early 18th century home of Bermuda that my colleagues on the science side of the shop said would have seen around 35 Cat 3 or stronger storms. So that's 17th century mitigation science, which we can return to, but we can build affordably and we can retrofit structures in the United States really quite well for, in particular for wind-driven storms. We do face risks that we understand less well. And the one that is top of mind for me these days has been wildfire. The increasing prevalence and distribution of wildfires has not been as predicted by the models that are deployed in the market today. And we also know how to build a home from scratch that's quite wildfire resilient, but mitigating existing structures for wildfire risk is cost prohibitive currently. That's a very important nut to crack, given how many Americans and other humans are living in sites that are increasingly exposed to extreme heat and therefore wildfire. And those are also opportunities. If we can solve for that with technology or with other mitigation means, that's an enormous opportunity to reduce life safety risk and to reduce the expenditure of public and private dollars. The flip side of these risks is incredible opportunity. And I tend to veer simultaneously between a cold-eyed look at the accelerating exposures and excitement about the scale of the investment and business opportunities that investing in transition and resilience represents for all of us.
That's great. And as I say, because this is an investment-focused audience, we're definitely going to talk about the opportunities out there and get folks excited. But as I say, it is investment focused. So, Greg, I want to turn to you just to give us a sense of what's the investor profile of individuals that are seeking ESG information from organizations. And is it only the impact investors, or is it relevant to mainstream investors? And your thoughts there?
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you for that question. It's been interesting for us, to be very honest. We for part of our mission is to democratize access to the equity game. So we've created some we've harnessed the crowdfunding platform WeFunder to generate some of our investors in it, and we've also created some opportunities for accredited investors to participate. But one of the things I think we've been very impressed and surprised and happy with was the fact that we're getting people from all spectrum of the investment, different profiles. So several people that I know are quite conservative financially and politically, and they came to us and found what we're doing and thought that we think you're onto something. They may use the word hedge, they may use the word opportunity, they may use the word de-risk, but they, as they kind of look at more of a long-term view, I think they think that it is indeed a good business decision to care about the future of our world. So we've seen quite a nice spectrum. I think when I talk to people about what we're doing here at CoPeace, we see that the young people and women are really helping drive the change. I tell the story of my parents being, very socially justice minded. We grew up in India, and things like that. And when I looked at their portfolio after we started CoPeace, it was the same portfolio as everybody else, but their mutual funds had 20% oil and gas, 10% for-profit prisons, 10% tobacco, 10% firearms, and they were aghast. And I was like, it's not just you, it's everybody. But then on the flip side, my 29 and 25-year-old kids will never allow that to happen because they are so careful about everything they do and they have access to information. So they are, I think that audience is really important to us. And we're seeing that being a motivator for what we're doing here at CoPeace.
Terrific. So I'm curious, are you seeing a generational shift in awareness for this?
For sure. And I think I love the panel here, because we're so complementary on the different areas of expertise, but especially on the crowdfunding side, we're seeing a lot of young people participate. And when we're out there telling our story, we are clearly more attractive to a younger set. So I think that's a big driver for what we're trying to do.
So I'm going to offer a chance for a poll to the audience at this point, and as well as for our panelists to hit upon this. There was just a recent survey by the National Bureau of Economic Research, published, I believe this week or certainly this month, in which they looked for what's the top motive for pursuing ESG investing. And they did their survey among retail investors. So I'm curious from the participants today what they see as being the top motive. And these were the four that they listed. Is it ethical considerations? Is it a climate hedging motives? Is it a return expectations that sustainable companies will outperform their competitors and peers? Or do you not see any reason to invest using ESG principles? I mean, that's fine to let us know how you feel. I think we've gotten some sense from the group in terms of it being both a value-driven aspect or a business driver. But I'll turn to Fani. I mean, you've hit upon some aspects of where ESG can play, but can you add to that where you think that ESG can add to an investor's decision?
Yeah, this is phenomenal. I love to see the results that came back actually, and because of the crowd, I would have expected to see 0% will not see any reason to invest in ESG. The reality is that every investment is hitting ESG, either to support it or for detriment. But we are all making an investment in ESG with our investments. And the reality also is that as we progress climate change continues to impact our economies because it is the most economically impactful event in humanity. And it will be more and more, there will be more and more evidence of that. So the only investment that we will have available is really on ESG. There is not going to be any choices anytime soon. So either we get on board right now or we'll do it later. There is a perception that ESG or anything that supports ESG will not have such higher returns. And this is a misconception. There is a timing lag. So ESG is not something that we will fix tomorrow, or if investors are expecting a quick return, that's not in ESG. So it requires patient capital. But once we get over the hump, the returns are really abundant. And there is like plenty of studies and economical analysis out there showing that anything that will take into consideration this is the opportunity that we were talking about, new technologies, new ways of farming, new ways of living that considers the environment first and foremost, will show abundant returns.
Fantastic. So I assured the audience we will go into the political perspectives on ESG here in a second. But the segue now, I'm going to take it into the title of this session is around ESG Goes International, and our hosts are related to our sponsors related to Bermuda. I'm just curious, Steve. We'll start there and then we'll look around the world in terms of how ESG is perceived. But I'm just curious if you could give us some insights as to why Bermuda feels ESG is so important, how they've applied it, the issues of concern, how they've built opportunities out of advancing the ESG methodologies.
Thank you, Tom. And we could devote the entire hour, indeed, or entire day, or even to this topic. And I'll try to be very concise and begin by repeating my invitation to join us in Bermuda at the end of June. And if you do, and I hope you do, if you can't come in June, come anytime. Bermuda is beautiful year-round. And Bermuda is beautiful year-round because for 400 years, for 4 centuries, literally, Bermudians have been leaders in conservation. It's an island nation with no fresh water. And from that, Bermudians have built a global financial powerhouse and a physical paradise with incredible conservation principles. For half a century, Bermuda has been a global leader in the glamorous and exciting business of reinsurance. I assure you it is glamorous and exciting, particularly in climate-driven risk. The roots of the current modern Bermuda marketplace have their roots in Hurricane Andrew, which I tend to refer to as a miss, but a very significant storm which hit Florida in the early 90s. And over that period of time, an enormous wealth of human capital is built up in Bermuda to better understand climate-driven meteorological hazards like hurricanes and the recent important perils like pandemic and cyber, which is not a climate risk, and wildfire. Building upon that strength, the adjacent vertical for Bermuda is climate finance. And something very important that Bermuda offers the world here is pace of innovation. Everything that we do in business or from an investing perspective over the next 5, 10, or 15 years to promote transition and to mitigate climate risk, we should have done yesterday. And in the world of financial innovation, the appropriate systems of oversight that we see in Europe and the United States tend to slow things down. Bermuda has one regulator, which is A, unified, and B, outstanding with respect to climate-driven exposures, building upon that half century of expertise in reinsurance and insurance. So we can help you innovate it, we can do it in a way that meets or exceeds the world's highest standards, and we can help people get their financial solutions to market in both a responsible way and quite quickly. And whatever it is that Bermuda does with investors, with businesses, it will do in partnership, as it has done with reinsurance and insurance and related risks. And finally, if you are looking to research, one thing that we know is that we don't know everything. And BIOS, which has merged over the last few years with Arizona State University, is really a leading cutting-edge research institution, which is also quite pragmatic. And I'd invite you to visit BIOS if you make it to Bermuda, or reach out to me or to the CRAC research team, because we want to help move a more clear understanding of climate risk into the market and into the academy as soon as we possibly can.
I think that speed of innovation that you describe creates tremendous opportunities for folks focused on this area. and to look into how to leverage opportunities through that. But we do want to talk broadly about ESG going international. And Bonnie, I'm going to turn back to you. How do you see ESG reporting and investing differ around the world from a regulatory perspective, from a voluntary disclosure, and how companies talk about their efforts? And that will bring us back to a discussion around the U.S. and the differences between how ESG is perceived here and spoken of versus how it's perceived internationally and globally. So turn it over to you.
Yeah, that is a great point. There are, of course, disparities between the US and the rest of the world, and the rest of the world among themselves on the way of reporting, or it's really about the value and the importance that we give to ESG issues. And in this country, we're very, very polarized. So we have the country supporting and working towards ESG, and the other half not believing in climate change. So when you have like those two extremes, it's kind of hard to navigate the middle or the gray line. The European Union has come up as recently as last year or the year before with some reporting standards, making it mandatory for certain size companies to report and disclose climate and ESG information along or among with their financial statements. Now, there is this gapping or bridging or mapping between the ESG information in order to compare apples to apples when we read or look at financial statements to understand the impact. So the only or the best way that we have found so far is carbon. And that's why the carbon pricing is so important. And we're dealing with a market that is volatile. So it's really tricky. And that kind of information could come across as really speculative. And there is a little bit of lack of trust. That said, the European Union has come up with some standards. Other countries and other continents are adopting those as well. There is a lot of that going on in China, India. In the United States, the SEC pushed legislation last year. It didn't pass on some reporting requirements on ESG. So that makes it a little hard. Now, I'm going to share something probably too personal, but my first degree, my first master's degree was is in accounting, and it is from Buenos Aires, from the University of Buenos Aires. And at the time, I remember studying GAAP system in the United States that was so different from the system, or there were some differences with the international system that I was studying, and how while I was going to school, it was in the works to find some standardized solutions to be able to read financial statements and be able to translate them international versus GAAP. And here we are, no one even talks about that. And it looks like I'm a million years, I'm a dinosaur. So I'm expecting that this is what's going to happen as well with ESG reporting and environmental reporting. We will find a way. And unfortunately, because this is the way that we think and we can't envision anything else, it has to be measurable, it has to be numbers, and it has to be with a currency that gets tied to ESG. That's why the S and the G are so hard to measure, because there is no price tag. Now the E, we're getting a price tag on that. We can say, these are the emissions, this is the cost of carbon. Here we can compare apples to apples. So those are the things that we're pushing. And it is highly political. Lobbying is very, very difficult to get over, but it's a work that not only can be done, it is being done, and mostly we will get there sooner or later. There's not going to be an option. Investors are going to see the hit on their returns just by not doing the due diligence on ESG. So investors more and more will have to, by experience, by suffering losses, will have to demand this kind of information. And that's where that's opening the door for new legislation, I would say.
Terrific. Yeah, I'll speak from my own background in terms of being part of a multinational for many years. If you operate around the world, you have to adhere to standards around the world. And as you say, these standards are coming about and the demands are coming about in Europe. There's clearly an interest, and this gets to the question that was asked in terms of what do we have to do? What do we have U.S. politicians who are working against this model? Why do we have this challenge in the U.S.? And I think you've certainly hit upon the opportunity that models will be built. This will be a cost factor that will help to change attitudes. But I'm just curious from the other panelists, Steve or Craig, what do you think what trends will come about to change the mindsets that are around today? Or do you think that there'll be something that we'll be dealing with for a long time? Steve, why don't you go first, and then we'll go to Craig.
Well, thank you for that, Tom. And I tend to think that in general, the issues that align us are broader, deeper, more important than the short-term dynamics that tend to divide us. We all agree that we should invest in sustainability, that we want families and homes and businesses to be safe in a storm and more resilient from increasing risks. And I think to some degree, the onus is on us, businesses, investors, entrepreneurs interested in climate, to communicate effectively. If a particular aspect of vocabulary lands with a thud, I think we can decide to evolve it. But building bridges, as it were, whether it's barrier islands or otherwise, is the way forward to match capital and risk, capital and opportunity. In general, politicians, like investors, like to see growth. They like to see prosperity. They like to see their communities thrive. And they like to reinforce strength against challenge. So I tend to look at the future with a lot of optimism. And if I look at one thing, if you have on one side of the channel climate scientists, reinsurers, and technical investors, we may not be the best in the world at effective communication. So if we can do it by looking in the mirror and say, someone's got to help us communicate to the humans more effectively. And to Fanny, to your points earlier, price is an extraordinarily important form of communication. And whether we're pricing carbon or letting real estate values reflect an open-eyed view of risk at that location, that's an important way to communicate. But whether it's advertising or qualitative disclosures or other ways that you communicate with consumers, we can do a better job. And I think we need to do a better job by bringing more people into the mix to buttress what we can do. Growing that pool is one way that we can accelerate the changes that I think we all agree that we need to see.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Craig, from your perspective?
Yeah, and I like what both Bonnie and Steve said, and I think from our perspective, the opportunity and the risk are interrelated. So as we begin to communicate better to all the stakeholders, we can discuss the upside of the investment that gives us some hope and agency and influence in where we're going. One of the things we've been struggling a little bit with here at Copiece is but Fanny talked to about the measurement of everything. So we're working on creating some proprietary tools with an outside group that is bringing in some of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, and some other elements using some AI, and then calculating some of these things so that we can do a better job communicating the opportunity in front of us. So it feels interrelated to me, and I agree with the panelists that part of our challenge is to make sure that we communicate well to the world.
And I think the panel's done a really solid job of talking about where we're seeing the impacts of climate change. It's in the states that along the coast. It is in severe weather events in Texas. It's wildfires in California. It's in the agricultural sector. And Steve, I just want to go back to you for a second around your perspectives on where you're seeing investment and addressing of these issues despite potential conservative political situations in those states. How are those states still embracing the principles of ESG to change their energy mix and other things? Oh, you're on mute. So
I do that once a Zoom call, so I'm glad I got it out of the way.
Glad we got it out of the way. Yep.
Tom, you're right, and I'm reminded of an old cliche from a friend who ran a private equity firm back when tech investing was such an important theme, and he had that tech brand. He said, there really aren't any tech companies. There are tech companies and dead companies. That technology was transforming the way that we deliver value across every proposition, and firms that were ignoring the pace of technology change were just legacy dinosaurs that had a short life. Climate's the same way. Every company, every investment is exposed to climate risk, but also likely has opportunities given the pace of change that we'll all embrace. And it's something that I like so much about the TCFD framework, that it calls upon us to quantify in a reasonable and comparable way climate risk, but also encourages participants to give voice and clarity to their strategies to grow into the climate opportunities that are there. And we see elected leaders doing this Some of the U.S. jurisdictions that I think we've touched upon indirectly, they're southern, they're coastal exposed, for example, have become the world's largest producer of renewable energy. In other cases, important coastal states have invested very significantly in a scientifically sound way in making their coastal communities more resilient from hurricanes and flooding. I think there's so many paths that elected leaders want to make their communities safer, to invest in infrastructure, to reduce taxpayer risk. And I tend to approach it, how can I change the way that I communicate to build partnerships and coalitions, to create investment opportunities, to design business ideas that fit a particular culture and a particular set of needs that might be parochial from another perspective. And I, even despite the challenges in the recent headlines, I generally wake up optimistic that together we can do it.
Terrific. I just want to make sure, I know we threw out the term TCFD, and I just want to let folks know that's a task force for climate related financial disclosure, something that Mike Bloomberg was pretty influential in helping to build up acceptance for, and encourage folks to, that's one great source of information to help evaluate companies by looking at their voluntary disclosures in this country around it, but in other countries it is mandatory and becoming more accepted. Bonnie, I want to go back to you for a second in terms of, what do you see as being some of those external rating groups, or even your comments around what we were just talking about with how look at ESG. So your perspectives on what external rating groups can play and what reports might be useful information.
Yeah, another resource, I would say, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board. There is a whole course, if it is not a degree, I should look into that again, on sustainable accounting or sustainability accounting. So there are some standards being created, but they're new, but those are the tools that we have available to us. In terms of companies, ESG as a tool will definitely affect compliance, branding, their ability to hire. Craig was referring to the younger generation being attracted to these issues, and there is a truth to that. There is a reality. I see it as well in terms of employment and hiring. The younger generation these days, they do not want to work for a company that has a reputation for polluting. So companies are having a hard time recruiting talent, more so educated talent. So at the end of the day, all of this is going to affect price per share. At Jacaranda, because we build economic models for different parts of the world and different industries, our motto is making regenerative agriculture profitable. If it is not profitable, it's not something that we're pushing. So for me, when I started this project, this thought process, and I worked really hard on outsourcing good, whether it's good or it's not good, that is not my job. I make it profitable. So that has been a huge lift for me, because I outsource good to folks like Craig and Stephen, who are doing amazing work. But my job I see as making it profitable, and I see how it can be made profitable. So at the end of the day, it is going to show, if not through measurements and convincing. That's the one thing, that we are not going to move the needle by convincing investor by investor, company by company to transition, but we show it with profits. The numbers will speak for themselves.
Terrific. And we will go back to the survey results to see how this audience looked at it and others. But Craig, I just want to turn back to you for what's, I think we've hopefully convinced folks of the value of ESG long term. But what sources of information do you rely on to validate, verify, or affirm good ESG practices? And I know many times you're dealing with small companies. I'm just curious how the challenge might differ from looking at a small company versus looking at a large company, and where you go for that information.
Yeah, well, it's a great question. I think the good news is we are seeing a lot of great ideas. We're seeing, especially young people that have some good business ideas that we see, that we think are doing the work and have a chance to have the impact and the return that we're seeking. We are not shy as well. I liked what Fonnie said about having a strong return, because for us that helps with the sustainability of what we're trying to do. As far as data points, we're getting better at that as we go. I think that one of our we consider ourselves impact investors, and what we were seeing, and we're still learning. And what we're seeing in the space is that so many people were paralyzed by the fact that, okay, this is not hitting 99 out of 100. We can't do anything. So what we do is try to look at everything on a case-by-case basis, bring in the tools that are available using the GIN and things that we got from the B Corp assessment, and applying that, but then also adding the narrative. So the way that it works for us right now is to be able to take the data and add the story and move. Because what we have seen is that because that paralysis, that people are so cautious that a lot of times they don't make the investment. And I think what we're trying to do at as Copiece is move. So that's not, I don't think that's a great answer, because we're still learning about all the different data points, but that's the way we're solving it right now.
And do you rely upon, how important do you think verification of information is, and review, and do you think that that's something that folks should be considering when looking at ESG disclosures and such information, and as to what oversight there is given?
Yeah, for sure. I think the challenge is how do you verify, and I think with us, I mean, the fact that we're making progress on this proprietary tool allows us to verify a little bit better. But I think that at some point, the people who are working hard at solving this problem, as long as they can show a track record of success, there has to be a little bit of trust, I think, that people are doing the work. So yeah, I say yes, verification is important. The challenge is just how do we do that? So from our perspective, the application of the story on top of it helps us verify, and we do interviews, and we try to get to the bottom of what the business operations are all about.
Well, in a minute we'll go back to the poll results, I think, and then we'll talk about. Here's what the audience said. They talked about ethical considerations being a dominant, climate hedging and as being a positive. Return expectations play a role, but sort of falls. By the way, it shouldn't have to be one of those three. You can probably combine them for a reason, but you can't combine the last one with any of the others. But I'll give you the actual results from the National Bureau of Economic Research. 45% of the respondents actually went with they do not see any reason to invest in ESG.
45%.
And Tom, the thing that is so striking to me about that poll result is that in my own experience, the number of investors of any kind, public, private, strategic, the large institutional passives that ask about climate issues is 100%. And it's not most of them, it's not a majority, it's become 100%. So I think that reality of what investors want to ask management teams in a private session or demand of you at an annual meeting in respect of your SEC filings, and it's 100%. And that poll answer, I think, is really quite interesting, actually.
Mm-hmm.
I think you absolutely nailed it. And then, by the way, just 7% said they were motivated by return expectations, despite the fact that we've seen lots of good data indicating that those companies that are focused on this issue do have stronger performance. To your point, I mean, they may not be phrasing it as ESG when they embrace it and interact with the companies. And I think that's part of what you're getting at is there is a lot of relevant information that falls under the categories of way we described ESG that folks may not realize that they're engaged on ESG, but that these are factors. I'm just curious, Steve, any other examples that you can highlight about factors that folks should be considering in evaluating organizations that relate to these topics that are good business risk management decisions?
Well, as we've touched upon already, I'm passionate about governance, and I think that medium and long-term investors reward better governance. So cost-effective enhancements to a firm's governance regime are both a better way to run your company, and they'll pay off by reducing your cost of capital, if not the immediate term, certainly in the medium term, of course, the long term. But I'd love to return to something that our colleagues touched upon already, which is the importance of human capital. It's by far the most important form of capital. And by becoming a firm that can attract leading capital in that form, the best talent, and retain that talent, the payoffs for that are enormous. And the kids are smarter than I am. So being a place that excites young talent opens up opportunities for execution and strategy that are beyond the ambit of my own imagination. And it's part of what makes managing a company in today's environment fun to do as well.
Terrific. Bonnie and Craig, I'm just curious, the ESG is labeled as being applicable to the long-term investor, but I'm curious, do you see it, where do you see it having value for the near-term investment, and how you might see the impacts that are around us might be related to ESG and incorporate that into near-term investment decisions? Bonnie, you want to start, and then I'll turn it over to Craig.
Yes, thank you for that question. Again, we didn't come up with the term ESG or the need for reporting on this overnight. It took a while for us to get to this point and make things as bad as it's gotten. So the whole world is developing this new system. So it will take a while to reverse the impact of climate change. And so this is definitely an industry that needs patient capital. I like to call it redemptive capital, which is capital that is returning the natural world to a state of wholeness. So it has a redemptive characteristics. Now, until we get there, same as getting companies to lower or eliminate emissions 100%, we need a STEPS tool before we get to that point. Today, that STEPS tool is, you might call it greenwashing. Companies are buying carbon credits to compensate the emissions that they cannot eliminate. And that's totally fine. We need to be patient and understand that that is needed as a step towards that. When it comes to investment, we need long-term committed investment. Until we are there, this industry and ESG can use short-term as a STEPS tool. It's going to be a quick turnaround, investors understanding that they're not going to have the impact that same money will have if it were long-term. But it's still, everything helps. And not only financially, but it also sends the right signal to governmental agencies on what's needed and what the investors want to see.
Terrific. I just want to encourage folks to submit questions. I want to check if there are anything through the Q&A. I see the chat, but I don't know if there are other questions that are coming in off the Q&A that we should take on. If not, I mean, I certainly, Craig,
Tom, yeah, related to, yeah, I missed a little bit of that, but maybe on my side. But regarding kind of the near term versus long term, I think we have an educational responsibility to let people know that this is we're trying to change the mindset from the quarterly returns. At the same time, I think as we are evolving at Copies, we've had some pressure to show some momentum on that as well. We are on a path to become a publicly traded company because we think that liquidity is what allows our democratization of equity to really be fulfilled. But we've got it. For us, we're making a little bit of awareness in our investment decisions on some possibility of some shorter term exits that we think will be a win-win. So we can help support these companies as they're growing, but also allow them to get where they need to go. So we have a more of awareness than we did when we started, to be honest. And then the other thing is that we turned our attention to helping these companies in a different way. I mean, initially we were a little shy about our, no hair, gray hair, because we wanted to be cool with the young people. But we realized that these great ideas needed some support. So we're using our ecosystem and trying to help them grow. And in return, we're getting paid for some of our services. So that allows us to fulfill a little more of that short-term side of things. But overall, we would love people to be more patient with their capital.
Terrific. We're reaching about the end of our hour. Steve, I'm just going to turn over to you, to get your insight in terms of the leveraging of ESG and the near-term effects that you're seeing as well around how to employ this information and what you might think this group of investors might want to look at in evaluating their portfolio around ESG. Maybe that's the better place to go as to what this group should be using ESG for in evaluating.
Nice.
On the one hand, it's a great question, Tom. And as you look across the universe of investment opportunities in registrants, it's always so hard to drill down to a specific question. Are you deep into real assets? Are you in transmission? Are you a retailer? But I think the most important thing you can ask is begin with the presupposition there are both climate risks and climate opportunities in every investment that you make. And if I was going to ask one question of any management team or in respect of any investment, it'd be a two-part. Do you have a plan? And who is in charge of it? And we could debate whether the plan is terrific or terrible, efficacious or not potent enough, but people need to begin, and that's an opinion, but people need to begin that they have a plan, they're trying to execute the plan, and then you can evaluate whether you're aligned with the plan. But if the plan is not being managed by a human being with real organizational authority, then it's also just a piece of paper and it's not a plan. So do you have one? And is it someone with board authority who can allocate resources of the organization and carry the culture of that organization forward? As an investor, those are the two most important things I look for.
Terrific. Well, I just want to thank everybody. I'm going to have to book my reservations to the Bermuda Climate Conference because I got a feeling out of this discussion, there's going to be a big rush on joining the conversation down there at the Climate Summit. And really do appreciate everybody's perspectives. I think the audience really hopefully gained a tremendous insight into how every company has to be a climate company. Every company has to be an ESG company in order to attract talent, manage their risk, have a robust supply chain, and that these are critical decisions for any business, whether they're labeled as ESG or labeled as business risk and enterprise opportunities. So thanks again to everybody for joining us today. And with that, I think we'll wrap up. So have a good day.